Right now, something is happening behind the scenes of your life, and you don't even realize it. There are files being written about you, your past, your mistakes, your failures, your silence, your potential. People are already forming opinions, building narratives, deciding who you are before you even step into your full power. But here's the truth they don't want you to understand. Nothing becomes official without your signature, not your past, not their judgment, not their version of your story. Until you decide who you are, the file is still incomplete. And today, you take control back. People often underestimate how easily a person can be misrepresented when only fragments of their life are visible. One mistake becomes a label. One bad season becomes a permanent identity in the eyes of others. A moment of weakness gets archived as if it defines the entire person. But the truth is, no human being is ever fully represented by what others have seen in limited time frames. You are not a single event. You are not a screenshot of your lowest moment. You are an ongoing process that most people never take the time to understand deeply. Still, they create conclusions, and once those conclusions are formed, they tend to spread faster than your real story ever could. The danger is not that people misunderstand you. Misunderstanding is normal. The danger is when you start believing their incomplete version of you. When you start treating their opinion as a final document instead of a rough draft written without full context. Because the moment you accept someone else's interpretation of your identity, you stop editing your own life. You begin living as a reaction to their perception instead of a reflection of your true potential. And that is how people slowly become smaller than they really are. What others call your identity is often just a collection of observations made during moments they happen to be watching. They didn't see the nights you rebuilt yourself. They didn't witness the effort behind your silence. They didn't feel the internal battles you fought when no one was around to notice. Yet somehow, they still feel qualified to define you. That is the illusion of perception. It feels complete, but it rarely is. You have to understand something critical. Nobody outside of you has access to your full timeline. They don't know your intentions behind your failures. They don't know the lessons you extracted from your losses. They don't know the direction you are growing toward. So when they assign you a fixed identity, they are not describing you. They are describing a limited snapshot of you that no longer represents your current reality. This is why accepting external labels becomes dangerous. Because labels don't grow, but people do. If you accept a label from a past version of yourself, you trap your present self inside outdated expectations. And over time, you start performing that label instead of breaking it. You begin unconsciously aligning your actions with a version of you that no longer exists. The strongest individuals in life are not the ones who are never misunderstood. They are the ones who refuse to live inside misunderstandings. They don't waste energy arguing with incomplete narratives. They outgrow them. They evolve to a point where old definitions no longer apply, where the gap between perception and reality becomes too wide to ignore. At that stage, something powerful happens. People are forced to update their understanding of you. Not because you explained yourself better, but because you became undeniable. And that is the real correction of identity, not defense, but evolution. Silence is often misunderstood as strength, but in many cases it becomes a quiet agreement to let other people define the story. When you remain silent in moments where your identity is being shaped by external voices, you are not just avoiding conflict, you are allowing interpretation to replace truth. And interpretation, once it spreads, becomes harder to reverse than the original event itself. People rarely remember facts with precision, but they remember narratives with emotion. So if you are not actively contributing your truth, someone else will fill that space with theirs, whether it is accurate or not. The world does not pause to wait for your explanation. It moves quickly, builds opinions fast, and distributes assumptions even faster. In that environment, silence can feel safe, but it comes at a cost. Every unanswered assumption becomes a seed. Every uncorrected misunderstanding grows roots. Over time, what starts as a small misjudgment can become a widely accepted identity that feels difficult to challenge. Not because it is true, but because it has been repeated enough times to feel true. This is why visibility matters more than people admit. Visibility is not about attention-seeking or validation. It is about ownership. When you show up consistently in your actions, your words, and your growth, you reduce the space available for distortion. You make your reality harder to rewrite incorrectly. People can misinterpret a moment, but they struggle to misinterpret a pattern. Consistency creates clarity, and clarity destroys speculation. Silence also creates distance, not just between you and others, but between you and your own truth. When you do not express, clarify, or act, you begin to internalize external narratives as possibilities. Over time, you might start asking yourself whether the assumptions are actually correct. That is how doubt enters quietly, not through failure, but through absence of response. And once doubt settles in, it starts influencing behavior, confidence, and decision-making. There is also another layer most people miss. Silence gives authority to louder voices, not necessarily truer ones. In many situations, the most confident storyteller becomes the default narrator, even if their version is incomplete or biased. That is why history, relationships, reputations, and opportunities are often shaped by those who speak or act with clarity, not necessarily those who are most accurate. If you are not present in the narrative, you are not just missing from it, you are being replaced within it. Breaking this cycle does not mean reacting to everything or trying to control every opinion. That would be exhausting and unrealistic. It means choosing when and how to make your reality visible through action and consistency. It means understanding that your life is not defended through arguments, but through evidence. Every time you show up, improve, or continue despite misunderstanding, you add weight to your true identity. Eventually, something shifts. The noise around you does not disappear, but it loses authority, because lived reality always becomes stronger than spoken perception. And when your actions speak louder than the assumptions, silence is no longer protection. It becomes unnecessary. Most people try to change how they are seen through explanations, excuses, or long conversations about their intentions. But perception rarely shifts through words alone. People don't upgrade their understanding of you because you clarified yourself better. They upgrade it when your reality becomes impossible to ignore. That is where action becomes the only signature that actually holds weight. Not temporary effort, not emotional promises, but consistent behavior that proves a new identity is forming. Think of your life like a document that keeps getting updated. Every action you take is another line written into it. But unlike words, actions cannot be easily misinterpreted for long. Someone might doubt you once, question you twice, but repeated evidence forces them to reconsider their entire understanding. That is why action is not just movement. It is communication at the highest level. It tells the truth without needing permission, explanation, or approval. When you rely only on words, you stay trapped in a cycle of defending yourself. You keep trying to convince people who are already committed to their version of you. And that is a losing battle, because belief is not changed by argument alone. It is changed by contradiction. When your behavior no longer matches their expectations, their old narrative starts to break on its own. They don't need convincing. They need exposure to a new reality, long enough for it to overwrite the old one. This is where discipline becomes more powerful than emotion. Emotion is temporary. It rises and falls based on circumstances. Discipline is repetitive. It builds structure even when motivation disappears. Every disciplined action you take is like stamping a new version of yourself onto reality. You don't erase the past version with words. You replace it with consistent proof of growth. Over time, the accumulation of small actions creates a transformation so visible that even skeptics cannot deny it. The interesting part is that action doesn't just change how others see you. It changes how you see yourself. Every time you follow through on something difficult, you reinforce internal trust. You begin to believe your own ability to evolve. And once that internal belief strengthens, external validation becomes less necessary. You stop chasing approval and start building evidence. People often think transformation is sudden, but in reality, it is repetitive. It is showing up when it is inconvenient. It is continuing when results are not immediate. It is choosing growth over comfort again and again until your new identity becomes undeniable. That repetition is what turns intention into reality. And eventually, something powerful happens. You stop arguing with your old image. You don't need to defend who you are anymore, because your current life speaks louder than any outdated perception. The gap between who you were and who you have become becomes too wide for others to compress into their old opinions. At that point, your actions have already done what words never could talk. They have rewritten the narrative without asking for permission. Most people live as if their identity has already been finalized, as if the story of who they are has been printed, published, and distributed beyond their control. They carry this invisible pressure that their past defines their future, and that other people's opinions act like permanent stamps on their potential. But that belief is one of the most limiting illusions a person can hold. Your life is not a closed file. It is not locked, sealed, or finished. It is still actively being written, and more importantly, you are the one holding the pen. The idea that someone else has already decided your outcome is only powerful if you accept it. In reality, no external opinion has the authority to finalize your direction unless you allow it to become your truth. People can speculate, judge, assume, or predict, but none of those things have creative power over your actual future unless you surrender that control internally. The moment you believe the narrative is fixed, you start behaving as if change is no longer possible. And that is where potential quietly dies, not because it was taken, but because it was abandoned. Understanding that your life file is still editable changes how you move. It shifts you from reaction to intention. Instead of trying to defend an old version of yourself, you begin constructing a new one with purpose. Every decision becomes a line of revision. Every habit becomes a correction. Every effort becomes a quiet rewrite of what others assumed was already decided. You stop living inside their conclusions and start operating inside your own design. What most people miss is that final drafts in life are never declared by words. They are declared by consistency. You decide when your story becomes stable through the level of discipline you maintain over time. The more consistent your actions, the more permanent your direction becomes. And when that consistency aligns with growth, your identity shifts in a way that feels irreversible, not because it was forced, but because it was built step by step until there was no room left for the old version to return. There is also a psychological turning point that happens when you realize you don't need to rush to prove anything anymore. When you understand the file is still open, you stop panicking about how it looks in its unfinished state. You stop reacting to every opinion as if it is a final judgment. Instead, you focus on building something so strong that external commentary becomes irrelevant, not because it disappears, but because it no longer affects direction. At that stage, control returns to where it always belonged, with you. You decide what gets added, what gets removed, and what version of your life becomes the dominant one. You are no longer negotiating with your past or explaining your present. You are actively designing your future. And the most powerful realization is this: nothing about your identity is permanently assigned until you decide it is. The file only becomes public when your actions are strong enough to make the new version undeniable.